Hi, good afternoon to you all. Welcome to another webinar from the webinar series at Watchful Software. My name is Patricia Alves. I'm the marketing specialist based in the Europe region. Today, we'll be addressing the BYOD security battleground. The agenda for today's webinar, first we'll have introductions for our panelists and presenters and some house rules. Then we will have the BYOD and its impact on the enterprise. We'll talk about SWOT analysis on DLP, MDM, and MAM, leveraging RightsWATCH in a BYOD world, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So feel free to make whatever question you have by the end. So introductions from our presenters today. We have with us Chris Hazelton. He's a research director for enterprise mobility at 451 Research. He'll be doing the first part of our presentation. And then we have Rui Melo Biscaia, which is Watchful Software Director of Product Management. He will be presenting part of the webinar addressing how RightsWatch covers the BYOD environment. Some house rules so that you're all okay with it. So everyone is muted centrally. You don't need to mute or unmute yourself. We are recording this webinar, so you'll have access to it on demand on our website after it's ended. And as I said before, the Q&A session is at the end. You are welcome to enter questions anytime. You can use the question feature on the GoToWebinar control panel for that. Now I hand it over to you, Rui.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Can I ask you to share your screen and the slides with the data points that we have? Thank you all for joining us. As Patricia is saying, I'm responsible for product management, and we are very pleased to have Chris joining us today. We have a couple of slides. We promised that we're not going to bother you to death with slideware, but we have a couple of slides. And the first thing that I want to start with basically is asking Chris for his insights and his opinion on a couple of data points that we at Watchful were able to gather out of the internet, multiple reports, multiple data sources in this case. So, I mean, the actual numbers may vary from here to there. The point being, Chris, I mean, if you look at these numbers on the percentage of tablets owners that use their personal device to access corporate data, or, you know, smartphone users, or even, you know, unmanaged devices, do you feel that this is, you know, a real indication of the reality out there? How do you see this these numbers?
Yeah, thanks, Rui. Absolutely. So the first data point, you know, you see a high percentage of tablet owners using that device to access corporate data, and first and foremost, it's going to be email. But immediately upon, you know, looking at those emails, there's going to be attachments. There's going to be data, and there's going to be sensitive corporate data that's included on those devices. And it's not something that is maliciously done by the employee. It's a matter of just, this is a great device for viewing data, viewing email, and being productive outside of business hours or even during business hours.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is just, guys, this is just the first data point that we have to show you. This is just to set in the stage. We will now hand it over to Chris, that, as Patricia said, is a research director at 451, and I want Chris to, you know, take us through a couple of slides and data points and insightful information that he has on the BYOD. So, Chris.
Sure. And you want me to address those other two data points, or do you want me to move on? It's up to you.
Whatever you feel it's appropriate at this time.
Yep. So the middle data point, you know, definitely agree with that. We see very high use of smartphones, very similar to the data point around tablets. But in the case of a smartphone, it's just something that you have with you at all times. a very good kind of indicator of how important a smartphone is there are a few things that when you leave your house, you will return to your house if you forget, and a smartphone is absolutely one of those. And so it's a great way to remain connected personally, but also increasingly, and this is very well known, probably among most attendees, is that you're getting corporate data on that device because it's very convenient and it allows you to be responsive to your customers. The last one, so the rate of use. So here you have a very large portion of companies that we see understand the value of mobility, but they're just still not sure how to get a hold of the use of personal or BYOD devices in their environments. And so there are a number of companies that are just really looking for direction on what to do, and that's really the point of this webinar.
Thank you, Chris. So, Patricia, if you just hand over control to Chris so that he can take us through his slide deck, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Patricia. So just a little bit about 451 Research. So we were founded in 2000. We have over 200 employees and over 100 publishing analysts. We have over 1,000 clients that span technology, service providers, end user organizations for very large IT organizations within those companies. We also have about almost 20,000 senior IT professionals that we engage with on a regular basis to understand what are their needs for innovative IT, so spanning mobility, security, cloud. And so I oversee the enterprise mobility practice. We have 7 analysts that focus on enterprise mobility management, app development, mobile security, content management, mobile payments, engaging with customers. So really the whole spectrum of enterprise mobility. A little bit more on what we cover. We really cover the core to edge. So from the data center to the mobile device. We acquired a company called Uptime Institute, which focuses on the facilities around the data center, and then my team all the way at the end point, at the edge, focusing on users and devices and data. So let's talk about bring your own device and its impact on the enterprise. So this first slide is from our European employee survey. And so there are 3 categories of companies and IT policies here. So the first one is, my IT department allows me to install apps that allow me to be productive or use internet tools on mobile devices. The second is that IT does not allow me to do that, to choose my mobile apps. And then third is the employee isn't really sure what the IT policy is. And so here you see in blue users that install apps to be productive on their mobile device. So obviously very high among companies that allow employees to do it, but also pretty interesting, like 10% of employees still are able to and still are installing applications on devices where IT does not allow them to do so, and then almost as much 8% where they're not sure of that policy. So, and then you see pent up demand in light blue, where you see 45% of users want to use productivity applications, but can't because their company doesn't allow them to. So next, just what is the rate of BYOD, and what are the categories that we see? And so here we see first that 25% of companies allow employees to bring in a device of their choice. Sometimes there's a list of devices that are acceptable and what IT can support, and that we recommend as well, as long as you're really kind of giving that choice to the user, so they can work in the environment, work in the operating system that they want. And you see about a quarter of companies do this. And then you see, 28% of companies allow employees to bring in devices, but they don't really provide any support. They're aware of these devices. They're possibly planning to support or roll out services. And then you see 32%, just aren't really actively engaged in monitoring or understanding what their users are doing. They're not encouraged, but they're not really banned. And then lastly, you see 15%. So about 85% of companies knowingly or unknowingly support BYOD, and just 15% are out there actively blocking and engaging users, or not allowing users to engage on a mobile device. So what about the use of and concern about corporate data on employee-owned devices? And so here we see, surveying 2,000 companies, that only 11% aren't really concerned about whether or not they need to silo or control corporate data on a mobile device. This is almost like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend brushing your teeth every day. Everybody is pretty much very aware of what they need, that there is corporate data on these personal devices, and so you see 45% are extremely concerned about having corporate data on a personal device, and 44% are moderately concerned. So go to next slide, please. So what is IT doing about controlling that corporate data on the device? And so here we see 40% have implemented a DLP. That's going to be kind of corporate-wide, not necessarily mobile-specific. Also, 39% have deployed a VPN, and that's generally a device-level VPN. So all traffic is going through that VPN, personal and corporate data. 27%, so an area I cover is enterprise mobility management. So here we see 27% of companies have deployed mobile device management, which is good for provisioning devices and deprovisioning devices, but generally doesn't have a very strong data focus. We see 21% have employed digital certificates. Network access control is also pretty high, to intercept devices as they come into a corporate Wi-Fi network. Content management, here we're seeing more granularity in terms of the data. So companies have deployed things like enterprise file sync and share to help employees kind of move data somewhat responsibly between a desktop and a mobile device. And then also the same level for mobile application management, where companies have focused on providing a corporate app store and pushing out applications that the company has built or bought or are recommending for employees. So let's go into the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats for a couple different technologies. So the first is mobile device management, and so as I mentioned, this is really meeting the initial mobile pain points for employees, and mobile, getting the email on the device, provisioning an email account, provisioning corporate Wi-Fi access points, mandating the use of a PIN or a passcode on the device. Initially maybe pushing out some applications or content, but it's very much focused on controlling the device. And so a weakness of mobile device management is that for an employee-owned device, it can be seen as somewhat heavy-handed. There's also a perception that mobile device management gives greater visibility for what the user is doing on the device than is actually happening. And so that's a challenge for MDM vendors. It's a challenge for IT if they're going to be rolling out MDM, particularly for employee-owned devices. An opportunity, though, is that mobile device management really provides a footprint for other mobile technologies. It does provide that visibility into the device, and then the ability to push additional services. Some of the threats for mobile device management, we'll get into mobile application management in a second, but companies can just deploy mobile application management and not worry about managing the device. Exchange, Microsoft Exchange also provides some capability with Exchange. And then there's also the wait and see approach, where I'm just not going to do anything, and we see that in the rates of BYOD, where companies aren't really supporting or monitoring the use of employee liable devices. And that may sound all well and good, but there's, as we know, there's a lot of corporate data going on to those devices, and so IT really needs to be much more data-centric and data-aware and data-active on mobile. So the next slide is mobile application management, and so here, this really provides a control point for the future of mobility for a lot of organizations will be applications, and so focusing on the deployment and security around specific applications. And then the weakness is that it really requires that IT generally have a relationship with developers, or leverage an enterprise mobility management vendor who has a relationship with that vendor, and so it does create an additional layer of management and work that needs to be done anytime that application is updated. Some of the opportunities for MAM is that you really focus on the application and the data in that application, and it's much more acceptable in a BYOD environment. Some of the threat for mobile application management is it's really being tucked into a feature of mobile device management. Sometimes rolling out MAM requires, for some vendors, requires the use of mobile device management. And on my last slide here, this is the SWAT for data loss prevention. And so the strengths here, it does allow IT to check compliance boxes and perform policy-based encryption of sensitive data. And it should really form kind of the basis of any comprehensive data security program. The challenge, though, the weakness, is that it's really hard to apply this policy. Also, DLP tends to suffer from false positives, and so that companies that deploy DLP don't really use them to block outbound transmission. And so it's really just about kind of monitoring the movement of data. But the problem is that once that data is gone, it's gone. And then lastly, DLP tends to be pretty complex and requires focused staff to really manage them. Some of the opportunities for DLP, simple DLP solutions can target to the small and medium space and mid-market. That really hasn't been an area that's adopted DLP in a big way. And that's also a threat. So some of these, cloud and a weakness of DLP is that it doesn't really address cloud and mobile all that well, but some of the threats are that there are cloud and mobile vendors that are addressing DLP, particularly in mobile application management. And so with that, we'll turn it out to the audience. One thing that we're doing is a survey, and so a quick poll for the attendees is, what are the primary concerns about supporting your mobile users? So the choices are a potential loss of data or other intellectual property on those devices, securing the corporate data on individually owned or employee-owned devices, providing a secure access to an internal Wi-Fi network for mobile employees, controlling the spread of malware for mobile employees, and then deprovisioning internal users when they leave the organization. So please.
Chris,
Yep.
I'll turn it back to you in terms of the question. If it was you, what would you say and why?
All of the above. So I think it's almost like this is kind of like a sliding scale of the complexity of why you want to roll out security tools for mobile users. And so I think really the primary one is that loss of intellectual property or corporate data. That goes hand in hand with securing a corporate data on BYOD. The internal network for employees, that's interesting, but for the most part, with the advent of 4G LTE, you're seeing employees stay on a wide area network, staying on the carrier network, and that actually is a challenge for IT because you're not seeing the data traffic that's going to that device. What applications are being used, what attachments are being used, what data the employee is using on that personal device. Malware is a risk, but it's really the loss of data is much higher concern, should be a much higher concern. Malware generally, if it's targeting Android, will not spread to iOS and will not move to Windows or Mac OS machines. They could be a portal into corporate data, but again, that's really the control of loss of data. And then deprovisioning that's something that's generally pretty easily done, just shutting down email if you want, or using MDM if you haven't. So really the short answer is number one.
Would it be a fair assessment to say, Chris, that you need to control who the users are, provision, deprovision, decommission those, and making sure that the right user has access to the information and to the device, etc. But you also need to control the device in itself, which device, where that device is, etc. And you also need another layer on top of that, that is controlling the information, the data that is flown, that is being used and controlled on that device. Would that be a fair assessment, would you say? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and those are very good stages of how you want to roll out mobile tools. It's you want to first understand who the users are, what devices they have, and then pretty much immediately, if you want to understand what are they accessing with that device. What are they walking out of your corporate campus with on their device, and what are they accessing remotely? And so understanding what that data is, and then the closer that you can get, I mean, think about it as degrees of control. I can control the device, but it really doesn't give me effective control on the use of applications. I can control the applications, but generally that doesn't always give me effective control of the data that's going in those applications. So the closer that you can get to the data in terms of management, the much more effective your company will be in protecting itself.
Well, I agree with you. And this is a very good motto to what's coming next, which is basically showing everyone that is in the audience a little bit on what RightsWATCH, which is software dedicated to information control and classification, can do when you're actually trying to control and classify sensitive data that is being used outside the controls of the traditional boundaries that you have. So when they're being used on a device, whatever that device is. And the first statement that I wish to imply right now is that, forbid is not a policy in itself. So making sure that your users will not use those mobile devices or whatnot, it's not gonna fly. You need to be able to make sure that the users are able to control and are able to use their devices, being it, corporately managed, being it their own devices, whatever. You need to make sure that they are able to control and operate the information that they need to control and operate wherever they are, being them seated on the, connected to the network, or on a device that sits in the network, or on a device that sits everywhere. So to keep us, in a productive state, as I was saying, and this was the challenge that I was asking Chris just a while ago, to keep us productive in terms of wherever we are, we need to manage, or companies need to manage their users. I mean, who, when those users are to be managed. They need to make sure that they are the right users that should have access to the information wherever they are. And this is, easily done by means of authentication, by means of whatever other process and workflow that you have to control who your users are. You also, for sure, you need to manage the devices. And for that you have mobile device management, you have mobile application management, you have DLP, as Chris was saying. And again, don't get me wrong, the plan is to build on top of existing technologies, existing security approach. It's not a game of subtracting things out of the equation, but adding layers on top of layers of security. And the last layer is, how do you manage the information? It's the who, the where, the which, the when, the data file in itself, the email, the PDF, whatever file type you can think of. How do you make sure that the right user gets access to the right file that he needs to have in whatever device is, being it in a corporate network or not? How do you make sure that you have all the three layers covered is one of the interesting aspects of the BYOD challenge. To manage the information, which is the last part of the previous slide, you need RightsWATCH, and that's where RightsWATCH comes into play. And what RightsWATCH does, it enables companies and enables an information security policy to be put into practice. And let's break that into small pieces to be a little bit more digestible. What we mean by implying or applying an information security policy. First, you need to identify what is sensitive data from what is not sensitive data. Most of those devices are just devices that the user also uses to, just log into Facebook or to send an email to someone else or to chat on Twitter or whatever, and that is, sometimes not sensitive information, at least most of the times. So we need to make sure that you are able to identify which information is sensitive, which information is not, not just relying on the user to make those choices, to be a user-driven policy, but it's really to be a policy-driven type of approach to it, based on content, based on context. To whom am I sending this? From whom am I receiving this? Or based on file type or whatever, or a combination of these criteria, actually acknowledge and understand what is sensitive data from what is not sensitive data. Once you do that, you need to classify it. Then you need to apply tags. You need to be able to make sure that the right people, according to the role that they're performing in your organization, and we're talking about role-based access control policies, of course, the right people, depending on the role that they have, the need to know over that classified information, will in fact have access to that classified information. And what we're saying is that depending on the role that they're doing or the role that they're performing today, which by the way might change tomorrow, they will have access to the information that they need to have. The third derivative will be marking and tagging. So labeling that information, those data files, in a way that you can actually understand what email is sensitive from what email that is not, what file is sensitive from what another file which is not, by adding watermarks, headers, footers, disclaimers, tags, picture, colors, the whole 9 yards in terms of visually helping the user understand that that is sensitive information, but also adding metadata into that file or into that email so that other solutions out there may reason better over that information. The fourth derivative in this process is actually to protect that information. And when we say protect, we're talking about digital rights management. And digital rights management is yet another layer on top of the DLP that we've talked about, on top of the mobile application management and mobile device management layers, which again, you should have them if you have them, and if you don't have them, if you're planning on having them, by all means have it. What we're saying is that you need those digital rights management controls policies on top of that, making sure that if the user in the correct device, in the right device, using the right application, is able to control and have access to the right data, the right file. And for that, you're able to allow the user to print, view, control, copy and paste, etc. that information. Last but definitely not least, it will be the tracking and reporting. So logging for forensic analysis and audit trail purposes later on to understand who did what, when, and how. Let's face it, security breach will occur, and the way that you understand and you make sure that you have an information that is capable to tell you who did what, when, and how is paramount here. You need to decrease corporate liability by marking and tagging and protecting those data files and prevent those security breach from occur. But you can also, you should also log that so that later on you can go back and do some forensic analysis or audit trails into that information. This is, in a nutshell, what RightsWatch does in order to protect your information. But how do we do it? And the way that RightsWatch does it is, again, by, the easiest way is for you to send an email. And I'm sending an email and sharing that email with 3 different people. The first one on the left has public access only. It's someone that should only have access in my environment, in my organization, or even outside, an external user, someone that my system does not know. I don't need to manage any password for him or anything like that, but that person will need to receive information from me. But if I send information that is secret in nature, and because RightsWatch identifies it as being secret in nature, even if I send it, as I was saying, to 3 different recipients, the very first one will have access to public information only. That in itself would mean that that user will not be able to open that email, will not be able to read that email, will not be able to have any access to any attachment that that email may have. In the middle, you have someone that, according to his security role, according to his need to know, his or her need to know, will have access to secret information. And that, by definition, according to the policy in the company, might just mean that the person is able to open the email, read it, and print it, but maybe not edit it or copy and paste from it, etc., etc., etc. But you can also have someone in the far right, which is, a C-level executive or something like that, that may also need to have access to that information, but his security clearance is above secret. That means what? That means that that person will be able to do anything else or everything that that person needs to be doing or wants to do with that information. Now, the good point and the good point I'm trying to make in this one is that if this slide is flipped over and then the person that used to have top secret now becomes someone that only needs to have access, RightsWatch will enforce that from a need to know point of view, leveraging digital rights management, as I've said. Next slide. So in a BYOD world, and we're focusing now especially on smartphones and tablets, of course, but we know that BYOD is, it's much more than that. When you're using RightsWatch to support this BYOD initiatives, and especially when you're dealing with digital rights management, which is the key, is the fact that you're encrypting emails, you're encrypting files, and you're allowing users to consume and produce those files on those devices. When you're dealing with email, RightsWatch allows you to read RMS protected email message. And here I need to say that RMS is the Microsoft version of digital rights management. It's called Rights Management Services. It has the on-premises flavor into it, or it has the Azure flavor into it. RightsWatch does not provide its own digital rights management algorithm or anything like that. It just leverages what Microsoft has made available and is developing with rights management. So with RightsWatch on top of rights management, for iOS, Android, and even BlackBerry, you're able to read RMS protected email messages on your mobile phones, and even create RMS protected email messages. And as you can see on the animation on the right, there's an explanation of how to do that. You can read those RMS protected email messages, you can create those RMS protected email messages, you can even reply and forward, even if you're online or offline, it doesn't really matter, if you are entitled to do that, if you have the RMS right in order to do that. But you can go much further than just email. You can say, what about files? Can I consume? Can I open? Can I read from RMS protected Word files, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints, PDF files? Can I do all that while I'm online and offline using RightsWatch on top of Microsoft Rights Management? Of course. You can also do that in terms of images and other file types when you're dealing with the native Microsoft app, which is the sharing app that enables you to read other, we dare to say, RMS protected P files technologies like notepads or images and even CAD drawings, etc., etc. . So moving on. The last slide that I have to show you, even before we go into the Q&A, because I really want us to have, some sort of a discussion into what was shown here, is that RightsWatch is really built on discovering via the policies that you want to set up what is sensitive data and what is not sensitive data. I mean, if you're relieving the user from the workload and the overhead of having to know, understand, and apply corporate policy, you are by definition in a better position in order to make that happen. So RightsWatch has that policy-driven engine that will enable you to discover, or enable you as a company to discover, what is sensitive information from what is not, and relieve the user from making that choice. Of course, the user can always make that choice voluntarily, but if there's a policy-driven or a policy rule that will have that will precede the decision by the user. Classification means to implement what is typically known as a multi-level security model to classify data. That means what? That means that I can have access to public information, internal, confidential, or secret, which is pretty much the standard matrix of classification. But then you can have whatever it applies to you as a company. But by applying that multi-level security model, you're actually increasing the awareness. You're actually educating the user, and you're supporting the adherence of the user to corporate governance and policies. By applying that multi-level security model to classify data, you're actually labeling that data also, in the sense that you're placing the meta tags, you're placing the watermarks, you're placing the headers, the footers, and the whole 9 yards into those emails and files. By leveraging encryption, here is digital rights management. You're actually controlling that file. Even if the user is leveraging, an iOS device or an Android device and opening a file that is sensitive in nature out of SharePoint, out of a Dropbox folder, if someone shares that file with him via Bluetooth, via wireless, or whatever other means or media to exchange information back and forward, it doesn't really matter how that file reaches the device. What it matters is that if the user will only be able to open, read it from, copy and paste from it, etc., and forward it, for example, in the case of an email, if he is entitled to do so. Access control is exactly that, accessing and making sure that the user identities are used to restrict access. Who the user is. Is it the right user that needs to have access to that information, yes or no? And then you can go even further into policy enforcement inside that encryption. Is the granular rights that will control individual actions and behaviors. It's just saying, I'm John Doe, I'm opening this file, and I can do everything with this file. But if I'm Jane Smith opening the very same file, I can do the limits to the things that I'm able to do with this file are lower than what John Doe can do. And this is basically role-based access controls being enforced on those granular rights. And logging, as I've said, is the ability for you to log usage and access actions so that you can go back later on, leverage a security incident and event management tool, for example, or just querying the database to do some information tracking and forensic analysis. This basically concludes what we have prepared for this 30 minutes. We are a little bit over that, but this 30 minutes to 40 minutes webinar, we will now open up, the floor for discussions. Q&A session is now at hand, but of course, we will also be publishing the recording of this webinar on our website, watchfulsoftware.com, or send us an email later on if you want to. But now it's up to you, Patricia. Tell us, any questions that have been asked by the audience. Fire at will.
Okay, so we've got a question from John, and he's asking, can I use RightsWatch to extend Microsoft's DRM technology to mobile devices?
Yes, absolutely. That is actually one of the key things. So Microsoft Rights Management, or DRM technology, or IRM technology, as you wanted to call it, has, is limited to the extent of which devices you're able to use it from. Those devices that are typically outside the Microsoft sphere. Microsoft is actively working on that. RightsWatch actually fills in some of the gaps that natively Microsoft is so far able to provide. So Microsoft, or better yet, RightsWATCH, enables you to use and completely leverage your iOS device, being it a tablet or a smartphone, your Android device, the same thing, or even a BlackBerry device that you want to leverage for that. Of course, Windows Phone and it's also natively supported.
Here's another question from Derek. I've tried DRM in the past and I found it cumbersome, to say the least. Are you saying it is better now?
Yes, much better. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Derek. I understand that. You know, applying DRM is a pain in the neck, or used to be a pain in the neck sometimes, because it lacked some of the fundamentals that could make it work in a corporate environment. It lacked the ease of use. It lacked the logging experience and the capabilities. It lacked the policy-driven capability not to rely on the user to do everything. It lacked the ability to go outside. You know, typically Microsoft-owned file types or OSs. And this is really one of the key areas that RightsWATCH is able to extend and explore in the DRM world by leveraging rights management and by fixing those capabilities, making it really easy and seamless for any user to use it, you know, on the desktop or even on those mobile devices, being easy or being able to apply policies, a policy-driven way, so that the user doesn't have to click, you know, a set of extra buttons and combo boxes in order to apply DRM and whatnot. Being able to really extend beyond the boundaries of traditional Microsoft file types and Microsoft OSs like the iOS and the Androids and whatnot. Being able to use this, you know, if you're using DRM on-prem or even DRM in the cloud, typically the Azure RMS flavor that Microsoft has released, and also the ability for you to have a very comprehensive logging on who has done when and how, so that you can go back and see a detailed view of that information tracking and to do some forensic analysis.
So there's a question from Keith. He's asking, in terms of budget constraints, if I need to choose, should I start with MDM, DLP, or DRM?
Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So here it's you know, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. The closer you can get to the data, if that is your primary concern, and it should be, then something like DRM is very useful and should be prioritized. MDM does not give if again that data-centric approach is your focus. Then you want to look at something around like DRM. If you want to check a box, MDM is very good at doing that. DLP, as I also talked about, is it's good for helping identify what's going in and out of the organization. But again, once it's gone out of the organization, it's gone. So so in this, I would point very strongly to DRM.
Okay, so we have one last question from Susan. When engaging BYOD, do I need to boil the ocean and set up every policy rule beforehand, or should I just embrace a phase approach?
I can take this one as well. And so here it's really, you need to kind of first understand, what are your employees using their mobile devices for, and specifically, what data are they using? And then you can start to build policies around the use of that data. And having tools like DRM will allow you to provide guidance both in terms of before use and during use of how and what data employees can use on their personal device. Employees are just trying to be productive. They're not generally trying to maliciously get corporate data outside to bad agents. They're just trying to be productive, and so providing that guidance, providing kind of soft warnings about what they can and can't do can be very helpful.
Okay, so that covers all the questions we had.
Okay, so it's on me to close it. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, we will be posting this webinar on watchfulsoftware.com. Please do send us an email or with any inquiries that you may have. And, well, join us next time. Thank you very much.